Hello and welcome to the Lost Boys podcast. I'm Tandy, joined by Harlan Fear. Say hi, Harlan.
Hi, Harlan.
On today's episode of the Lost Boys podcast, we're going to discuss all of the previews so far from Chapter 2 of Disney's Lorcana, Rise of the Floodborn. Harlan, have you seen these cards yet? Are you going to be watching them for the first time today?
I decided that it would be best for me to be like the audience and see them for the first time today.
Awesome. So we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to talk a little bit about what we got going on in the competitive Lorcana scene. I know last week we played some heads up on Pixelborn. You were head over heels about your Amber Steel mid-range deck, and you beat the living crap out of me. How's that going?
Good. It's actually Amethyst Steel. That one always trips me up too. I know, Amber and Amethyst. It's
third time I've done that in my brain.
Yeah, it's also really annoying just when I'm like building a deck and naming it, because the first two letters are the same also. So you have to get to the third letter to distinguish them.
Yeah.
Not
great planning on their part, I guess, about how to
that
short
one's a little tricky on that one. But yeah, I still do really like the deck. It's really good against Ruby Amethyst. I actually have been working on other decks since, because I've kind of, tweaked that one to a point where I'm pretty happy with, and I know it really well. And this week, everybody has just been playing Surfer Stitch, the 7-cost Stitch.
Oh, yeah.
And not only is that good as a strategy, just against Amethyst decks in general, playing to the board and having cards that generate card advantage while playing to the board to keep up, but also, I don't know if you've played a Steel deck versus a 4/8, but that's a chonky boy.
Yeah, I have played Steel against a lot of high willpower characters, and my blasting cannon or fire the cannons, my Tinkerbells, my grab your sword, they don't look quite nearly as good against those as they do against one mana Lilo making a wish.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not even that it's like you can grind through a 4/8 pretty easily, especially when you're drawing a bunch of cards and you're ahead. The problem is that their 4/8 came down while they already had 2 characters in play. And then they also drew 2 cards. So I have to give up a bunch of board presence and advantage just to get rid of this 4/8 that quests for 2. And then I am behind almost immediately. Not to mention that another issue that I've been running into is because my deck is so much more character based than Ruby Amethyst, I end up accidentally setting up their Rapunzels way more frequently, and it's a lot harder for me to control that than it is when I play Ruby Amethyst.
No, for sure. Rapunzel is an extremely powerful card in the mid-range Amber strategies. My emphasis has been so far on a much lower to the ground iteration of the Amber decks, focal point of Stitch Rockstar, but the Rapunzel into Surf and Stitch has been quite strong against those Ruby Amethyst control decks that we've been seeing all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally have not super jived with the hyper aggressive decks. I don't know if it's just the mulliganing system, I feel like, is less suited for finding hyper aggressive lines versus just finding functionality for several turns.
Yeah.
But I haven't super been in love with those hyper aggressive decks. I do enjoy playing more longer, more complicated games, so that might also be the reason. I do think that the whole new world style Stitch Rockstar decks are actually better against Ruby Amethyst specifically than the Surfer Stitch builds. Like I was mentioning before, it's pretty easy for Ruby to play around Rapunzel and Surfer Stitch.
Yeah, I think that they do a great job of keeping the board clean. Things like Maui really punish you for playing those mid-range characters with very low willpower. I just think that Stitch Rockstar just allows you to force a be prepared over and over again until the time comes. But as you said, against the Steel decks, the Rapunzels and the 7-drop Stitch, both extremely good. Other than that, I know that you've been tinkering with the idea of playing some Ruby Amethyst control yourself. I know there's some secret tech you don't want to give away, but what's your general thoughts about that deck, and what do you think the odds are you actually play it at the Invitational?
Yeah, so I do think that it is just the best deck in the format of this first chapter of Lorcana. I think that's pretty obvious to everybody at this point with all the results we've gotten from the previous 1Ks and 1.5Ks and stuff, that Ruby Amethyst has been like 50% of those top 8s so far. And that is just outrageous. Us coming from other previous card games, that's where, there would definitely be a banning happening. But, we're in the first chapter, the new set's on the way. Exactly. So, we're just dealing with it. And I do have the Invitational coming up, hosted by, us and Apex Gaming and TCG Player. And it is definitely on my mind that I could just play that deck versus, my Amethyst Steel deck that I do think is very good against that best deck. But there's something to be said for playing the best deck, and it's the best deck for a reason. You're pretty good against everybody.
Yeah, it's just very hard to actually win the game against them. Not only do they have the only real sweeper in the format would be Prepared, but a lot of their cards are geared towards stealing lore from your opponent, and so it's like kind of hard to race them sometimes too because of things like Ursula, both of the Aladdins.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that really is kind of making me shy away from it is the mirror match of playing against another player playing Ruby Amethyst. And while that is mitigated a lot by the specific tournament structure we're using for the Invitational, where we won't have time limits on the rounds, that's actually something that comes up a lot in these smaller tournaments where there's a Ruby Amethyst mirror and it ends up in a draw because the games go for a long time. But at the same time, when both people know there isn't a time limit, I played last night on Pixelborn. I decided to fire up, I built like a new build of Ruby Amethyst. I decided to fire up a game and I was like, perfect, I'll play one game before bed. And of course I queued into a mirror and it literally took an hour for best of one. So
That's
I don't know if I have the fortitude anymore as somebody who's kind of retired a little bit to play, 3 hour long games.
Yeah, here's the thing. We talked a lot before Ravensburger and Disney's Lorcana gave us direction for the tournaments. I actually think best of one is going to end up being the superior tournament format. And until there are something like sideboards added into the game, or just some reason why you think that, we should be playing best of 3 instead of best of 1. In other games, like best of 1 has started to become way more normal, but in Magic the Gathering, where we're coming from, best of 3 is considered to be the standard. I don't think that games of Lorcana end as quickly as games of Magic the Gathering. For one, the way that the characters scale in Magic, if your creature that you play has 4 power, that means it's going to be attacking for 1/5 of your opponent's life total because they start at 20. In Lorcana, all that's really well balanced by the characters being larger stats, but having smaller amounts of lore that they can quest for. And it takes a significantly longer amount of time, most of the time, to gain 20 lore than it does to deal 20 damage to your opponent in Magic. And so I personally believe the best of one will be what we end up doing next year. But for this marquee event, for this first tournament, we're following the guidelines, we're doing what they tell us to do, and then once we see if things just are breaking and falling apart, we're going to change it up, we're going to switch it up, and I think best of one could be the answer.
Yeah, so I think I'm a little bit on both sides of this, where I think both have their merits, best of 1 and best of 3. So I think for your normal standard type tournament where you just show up and you're playing your deck against your opponent, I think best of 3 is actually really good because that first game is a complete mystery, where I run into it a lot when I'm, playtesting on ladder versus, doing some focus testing with the people I'm working with for the Invitational, is I don't know what my opponent is playing. And that drastically changes how I mulligan. It drastically changes what I'm inking early, what I'm trying to hold on to for those first few turns. And that can change the dynamic of that game by a huge amount. And that is also the only game I play on ladder, right? Where in a normal tournament, in best of 3, where it's hidden information, that first game can be a bit of a crapshoot depending on what you're playing. And so I think best of 3 is really good for, leveling that out. But for a tournament like the Invitational, I think it would have been really good to do best of one because it's open information. We have open deck lists. I know exactly what my opponent's deck looks like. They know exactly what mine looks like. You can have that plan completely formulated from your opening hand.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think that one of the solves is having open deck lists for every event. If we create a culture where, at the beginning of the event, you just have like a paper copy of your deck list. At the beginning of the round, you just hand it to your opponent and vice versa. I think that would be super good. Also, you could just do something like show your opponent the 2 colors that you're playing in your deck so that they have a better idea, right? You can have like things that you're like allowed to show, like show them any 1-drops you have or whatever, right? So like show them a 1-drop of each color if you have them, or the lowest cost card of each color. If you, I don't know, well, there's ways around it, but I agree. I think that best of 3, perhaps not well suited for this game, specifically because games just last longer, and getting to 3 games finished in a Ruby Amethyst mirror in first set constructed is just not always doable. And it's not even doable in one game sometimes with yours last night. And I know for a fact that part of that is because of Magic Mirror. And in the Ruby Amethyst Mirror, there's no way to check your opponent's Amethyst, so your opponent's Magic Mirror, which means that whoever plays it earliest and starts using it the most and doesn't lose the game by doing so is going to have a huge advantage. And the fact that there's no maximum hand size means that you don't have to physically play any of the cards from your hand until you're reacting to what your opponent is doing. Maybe that changes in the next set. There is, one of those new items that can gain lore. We're going to be talking about that today. Have you seen this card?
Not yet.
That might change how you think about the matchup going forward, because that card seems pretty sweet. Anyway, long story short, best of 1 could be the future. For now, we're going to stick with best of 3. If it's a nightmare, which I think it will be in some spots, we're going to do stuff about it. But we're going to follow Ravensburger's guidelines as best we can while we, at the beginning. So. All right. Other than that, do you have anything about the competitive metagame that you've seen that you've been liking? Any deck that you've been testing out other than Ruby Amethyst or the Steel Amethyst deck that you beat me with last week?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been obviously getting beat up on by Surfer Stitch with my Amethyst Steel deck, which kind of made me switch. And that led me down a path of trying to build the best Surfer Stitch deck.
Okay.
Right? And so I tried it with pretty much every color pair possible. And kind of what I was finding was you're really good against steel decks because Surfer Stitch is just so incredible. Rapunzel's so incredible. But you end up kind of struggling against aggressive decks unless you are specifically steel.
Okay.
And then
do you think Amber Steel mid-range is like the place to be?
So that is what I found to be the best version of Surfer Stitch decks.
Okay.
The problem is that deck specifically kind of, I feel like, doesn't actually excel versus Ruby Amethyst.
Okay, that's the problem then, right? It's just the step ladder. So Ruby Amethyst squishes your Amber Steel mid-range, but Amber Steel mid-range squishes everything else in aggro, and then aggro sometimes squishes Ruby Amethyst because they don't have a cheap sweeper. It all costs 7.
Yep, and the problem is it's a rock paper scissors, but it's weighted a little bit, and the Ruby Amethyst is, it's rock, but it's like rock plus. So
nothing beats rock.
Exactly, nothing beats rock. Like, you might be good against it, but it's not good enough that you always beat it. Yeah. And the problem is that it is good enough to beat everything and is ahead in most places. Another kind of layer to this, a wrinkle I found, was one of the Surfer Stitch decks I did like was actually Sapphire. The problem with Sapphire Amber is you are really bad if your opponent has any kind of aggressive draw. Because you have no rush characters, you have no way to exert their characters, you do have Let It Go and Hades, but you don't have a catch-up mechanic.
Those are really bad against 1-drops.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to be playing from ahead or even to get ahead. And then you also actually, in those color pairs, Simba is a really good 2-drop that we've seen, right? Mm-hmm. But it's really good when you're being the aggressor. it's not a very good attacker.
Yeah,
even though it's
it says
2/3.
it literally says bodyguard on the card, but it's only bodyguarding characters. It's not bodyguarding your life total.
Right. So then you end up in this situation where you can't fall behind early, but you also don't have the best ways to stay on par early.
No Rafikis, no sweepers, no Gastons, no Maui hero to all. These are all the reasons why the Ruby Amethyst deck is king.
Exactly. And so that deck actually was the thing that really sent me reeling on my whole expedition with Amethyst Steel, was that I just kept running into this Amber Sapphire deck, and I just couldn't win. I went like 0-5 against it.
Nice.
Was
it the same person over and over again?
I think it was the same. It's really hard to tell on Pixelborn because if they aren't Patreon, they just have like Pixelborn and then a series of numbers and letters.
I see.
So it's a little bit harder to track, but it felt like 3 of them were like back to back to back, like immediate recues. So I think it could have been the same person.
Sure.
But I was just getting farmed. And so I, of course, started working on the deck and playing with it. And, I was farming anyone doing anything like me. And then everything else I was just getting trounced by. So, that's one that I have back in my pocket. Just, if going into the Invitational, I feel like the metagame's going to line up a certain way, I can pull it out. But yeah, it's not good to be not good at playing early and then can't play from behind.
Yeah, but it's tough stuff.
You draw a lot of cards and play a lot of big characters, though. So it's fun.
All right. Well, if you would like to know where you can play Disney's Lorcana, you can play it online right now on Pixelborn. And we're going to have a link to the Pixelborn Discord in our show notes. We usually do because we do use that program quite a bit. But if you're looking to play some live Lorcana, we have a couple events coming up for you over the next few weeks. This weekend on September 30th at the Apex Gaming Home Store in Caldwell, Ohio, we're going to have a $2,000 invitational qualifier. It's $2,000 total in cash and prizes. $2,000 in cash to be given away. And then the winner of that event will qualify for our $5,000 invitational that's going to be held on the October 20th weekend. We're also going to be doing an invitational qualifier on October the 14th. That's going to be the same thing, a $2,000 event where first place qualifies for the invitational. And then on October 20th, that Friday, at the Apex Gaming Home Store in Caldwell, Ohio, we're going to be doing last chance qualifiers for the invitational. We're going to be running 2 of those. And so we're going to be giving 4 invites away to the invitational, as well as our 12 invited guests. And they're going to be battling it out for the championship. If you need any more information on that, just make sure to follow our Twitter. We're Lost Boys LOR. And we're going to be tweeting about it a lot over the next few weeks. And we're going to be doing commentary on those events as they are played live. So that's what you got to look forward to. All right. So, Harlan, moving on, I want to talk about something that you haven't really interacted with yet. And that is Chapter 2 of Disney's Lorcana, Rise of the Floodborn. Are you ready?
Yeah. I got it open on my screen here.
Okay, I did a video last week where I went over all the cards, but I want to hear your thoughts, and I want to talk to somebody about them that's not just me rambling for 15 minutes while I give these cards a cursory glance. So we're going to go in order. We're going to start in Amber, and we're going to look at Mickey Mouse Friendly Face. So why don't you tell me about Mickey Mouse Friendly Face? What do you think about this card?
Yeah, so let's just start at the top. We have a 6-cost Inkable Mickey Mouse. It's a 1 strength, 6 willpower, quests for 3 lore, which is quite a lot. And then glad you're here. Whenever this character quests, you may pay 3 less for the next character you play this turn.
Yeah, big cost reduction effect there for just questing for 3. I think that for a 6-cost character, only having 1 strength is not desirable. But that's a really powerful ability.
Yeah, so this card reminds me slightly of Moana. Pretty similar stat line. Moana's a 5-cost, 1/6, also quest for 3. This Mickey, I do think, is substantially more powerful than Moana.
Sure.
I actually think this Mickey could be really good in these kind of, Surfer Stitch decks. Those decks actually do want some more high quest threats. That's one of the things that those decks have kind of struggled with, is to have something that quests for a whole lot.
Just closing the game is difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and also to be far enough ahead when you're pressing your advantage, that's something they can struggle with. You do have a lot of 2 questers, but 3 is a whole nother ballgame. And then also those decks end up with kind of a glut of characters that kind of, you're trying to play a 7-drop and, you're an Amber mid-range deck, so you have a lot of Rapunzels and 4-cost Hades. So it can be kind of tricky to, quote unquote double spell like we would do in Magic. This Mickey makes that very easy, where
Yes.
you can, you play your Mickey on 6, you quest with it on 7, you play your 7th Ink, and now you can play 10 cost of characters, which is huge.
I mean, especially huge
advantage.
Right, and especially when you're trying to play Carefree Surfer Stitch, where you really need a second character on the table already before you play the Stitch, and this allows for you to do that while starting from essentially a dry board on the previous turn.
Yeah, exactly. You only need to untap with one character in this Mickey, and then you can, get your 7th Ink, play a 3-drop, and play your your Surfer Stitch, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the next one, we have the Queen, Commanding Presence. This is going to be a 5-cost Inkable 4/3 with quest for 2. Has Shift 2, which means you can play it on other copies of the Queen. And then it has Who's the Fairest? Whenever this character quests, chosen opposing character gets -4 strength this turn, and chosen character gets +4 strength this turn. So you shrink their thing, you grow your thing. Generally, that means you're going to be eating up their thing.
Yeah, so playing a lot recently with the Sapphire Amber deck, really the only way you have to kind of win combats in quotes and get ahead is the support mechanic.
Right.
And this card is like the support mechanic on steroids.
Yeah, this is turbo support. Not only are you buffing your thing like crazy with +4, shrinking your opponent's characters makes combat significantly better. And what it really does, it doesn't actually do what it says, right? It actually just says your opponent can't quest unless they want their character to die. That's the subtext. And when you have cards like this, they're often so powerful when they're in play that them being in play is the threat and not what the card actually does. Because if you're playing into it, that usually means that you've already won the game or are about to win the game, because you're essentially sacrificing this piece, to the Queen's ability in order to just get ahead. And you have to kind of ignore it.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people will get kind of walked into when the second chapter first comes out is that, oh yeah, I can quest with all my things, and then they'll -4 my thing, +4 their thing, and eat my thing. And it's while that is what will happen typically,
yeah,
a lot of the times when you just quest all out, what's actually going to happen is that they're going to -4 your one thing and +4 their thing that's going to send into your other thing and trade for it up, and then they're going to eat your thing with another thing. And
yeah, well,
lose 2 things.
They're going to send 3. They're going to send 3 goons at your biggest thing that has -4 strength.
Yeah, exactly. And then their 4th goon that's just sitting around is going to eat your 6 toughness or your 6 willpower character. And yeah, I think this card has a lot of promise. I
love personally that it's inkable, and I think that it's not talked about enough. I think there's a huge glut of cards in Emerald that are powerful but non-inkable, and that actually creates a lot of tension in deck building with a second color, because you have to be very light on your inclusions of non-inkables. And so every time a card looks pretty good and is also inkable, that's just like a slam dunk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this card, I'm really excited to see other options for what we can shift this onto. Being shift 2, in my brain makes me think that they're going to make a 1-cost Queen.
Maybe. I mean,
it might just be that you upgrade your 3-cost and you get to, play 2 things in a turn when you shift this.
Yeah, I mean, everything that has shift has futures, right? And the futures are all just this card could be really good in a year, or this card could be really good next set. And that one with a dynamite ability when it quests, to shrink your opponent's thing and to grow your thing. I think that with shift just means that any future Queen that costs 1 or 2 is just going to be gangbusters.
Yeah, and kind of what I alluded to too is even if it's a 3 or 4 cost queen, this card is likely probably still going to be an upgrade either on stats or on your lore count, but also just being able to, do that, even basically considering that this is like an action for the cost of 2 when you shift it, it's a pretty good rate for that action. It's a great rate compared to, the actions we currently have from chapter 1. And yeah, I think that could just lead to this card being great anyway, because that's a really powerful effect for 2 ink. And then you can still play another character to the board and develop further that turn, even if, you don't get to have like a really cheap, efficient queen to set this up.
Yeah, the fact that it shifts for so cheaply compared, like almost all the other shifts are essentially -2 on the ink, and this one is -3 on the ink. And so basically this is just a nod to there's not that many cheap versions of the queen, and I think right now there's just the 5-cost queen from Amethyst, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so hopefully at some point we get a 2 or 3 cost queen, and then this shift is going to be pretty good. All right, next up, we're going to be moving on to a very powerful song. This is Zero to Hero. Why don't you read it off for us?
Yeah, so we have 2-cost Uninkable. Very important to remember. It's a song, so you can sing it with your 2-cost characters. Count the number of characters you have in play. You may pay that amount of cost less for the next character you play this turn. So it's a bit like a ritual. I'm typically, honestly, kind of bad at evaluating these types of cards. I don't know what it is, like my hangups with, ritual type effects and thinking in the most broken sense. I guess maybe I'm too much of a fair player.
Yeah, you're
my ink and play my 5-drop.
I am a spray and pray guy, and you're a curve guy. And I love playing decks where I play 3 1-drops on the first 2 turns, whereas you have primarily played these like grueling mid-range trading back and forth matchups. And Zero to Hero, I think, is going to be ridiculous in these it's like really low to the ground Ariel Singer Whole New World decks. This is the song that they needed, I think, to really make Ariel better and to just make the deck more explosive. And what this card basically does is that on turn 3 or 4, you're just going to gain access to a free character. And in this game, characters are the, divining force. And if you build your deck with enough characters that cost 2, 3, and 4, so that Zero to Hero is essentially just lets you play a character for free, that's incredible. And then when you start combining this with things like Stitch Rockstar, you get to do the big shift turn like ahead of schedule sometimes and for free, which puts your opponent so far behind that I don't know if they're going to have any recourse to get back into the game. Now, that said, this is not inkable, right? That's a huge deal. And sometimes if your opponent's checking all your early characters, this thing's not going to do anything. And so I would only really recommend playing this in a deck that is constantly refreshing its resources via Stitch Rockstar, via Whole New World, via Hades, 4-drop Hades to get stuff back from the graveyard. That's where I see this card really shining in the Lilo Wish Upon a Star type decks.
Yeah. So for fear of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah, please.
Do you think this card could facilitate playing Surfer Stitch in your spam aggressive decks?
Maybe. And I actually had 2 Surfer Stitch in my original spam deck, and it was never castable. I just never got to a point where I wanted 7 lore because, I was singing Whole New World with Ariel and just like playing all my stuff after turn 5 instead of inking anything. And so it just became rare that I actually did anything with Carefree Surfer other than ink it. And so it just kind of got stuck in my hand a bunch.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and I think the way you can kind of plan to facilitate a card like that is Lantern, like we talked about last week.
Yes, I do like Lantern, but I don't know if you can play Lantern in this card.
Exactly.
In the same deck.
This card, Zero to Hero, and Lantern are going to have a lot of tension with each other. They're in the same, cost slot. They're both uninkable. They do very similar things, albeit in, different regards. So
I've played with Just in Time a couple times already, and putting in a 5-drop ahead of schedule is very strong in some spots. This card, I think, is going to be similar in how it functions in your deck. And there were plenty of times where Just in Time got stuck in my hand and didn't do anything. at the very least, Zero to Hero can just be sung pretty early on with something like Simba to just kind of generate effectively 2 ink so that you can continue to play things early on, especially when Simba isn't questing. And when it's only questing for 1, you just want to find as many ways as you can to use it usefully. And there's a 2-cost song that I already play. I can't even remember. Be Our Guest. Yeah. And then now Zero to Hero gives us even more to do with it. And I think just finding ways for your best card to continually have uses is good.
Yeah, I also think that additional songs just to up your song count for Ariel is really good.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to play more than 12 personally, but that's whatever. It's like really? I've been going back and forth with people on it. I don't even care if I miss because I'm just refueling my hand next turn with Whole New World. People like the only people who can really interact with Ariel early are people who play Smash in Steel, and everyone else just has to let it be. And so when I miss, if I have a Whole New World in my hand, I don't really care because that card was just going to go to the Inkwell or be shuffled back into the deck anyway, or put into the graveyard and draw 7.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do quickly before we move on, I want to kind of compare Zero to Hero and Just in Time.
Sure.
Just because I think a lot of people on a baseline would like those two are the real comparisons, right? Where I think this card is way closer to Lantern and goes into decks that Lantern would go in.
Yes.
Where I do not think this card and Just in Time actually fit the same decks or roles in those decks. Where, Zero to Hero, you want to be in a go wide strategy, just like your deck, where, you spam 1 and 2 cost characters, where Just in Time, you really actually want to be in kind of more of a mid-rangey deck where, you're putting in a Cusco or a Mad Hatter, something where you're maximizing those 5 drops. And you really want to be curving versus dumping and then playing 1 extra big thing.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we're going to be looking at Elsa Gloves Off. Elsa Gloves Off is a 4-cost Inkable Amethyst character. It's a 3/4. It quests for 1 lore, and it has Challenger 3. A pretty generic version of Elsa, and we already have a 4-cost Elsa in Amethyst that doesn't have bad stats. It's a 4/4, quest for 1, and this one is just a 3/4 that has Challenger 3. I think this one might be an upgrade. What do you think?
Yeah, I certainly would say it is an upgrade just based on how games go typically. I think both of them are kind of going to be relegated to more of, limited, or maybe if you are really focused on maybe playing like a turbo shift Elsa deck where you shift the big Elsa onto them. I think that's another cool way you can do that. This card definitely facilitates that a bit by being a very reasonable body. But yeah, I think Challenger 3 is definitely better than the extra 1 point of strength, for sure.
All right, next up, we're going to be moving on to Merlin Shapeshifter. Why don't you give us a rundown of Merlin Shapeshifter?
Yeah, so Merlin costs 4, is Inkable, has 1 strength and 5 willpower, and then quests for 1. He has Battle of Wits. Whenever one of your other characters is returned to your hand from play, this character gets +1 lore this turn. So, I think Merlin is a card that a lot of people are going to try and build decks around. And I really hope that those decks are good and sweet, because this is the type of card I love, but it is also the type of card I'm very bad at building with.
Well, there's already a few things that this works with, right? Dr. Facilier, 7-drop. It works with 4-drop Mickey Mouse and Amethyst that does the brooms. It also works with Befuddle. You can bounce your own things with Befuddle. And so there's already a couple ways that you can utilize this to gain some extra lore. But that doesn't take into consideration that down the line, we may get ways to ready your characters that allow them to quest again. And at the very least, I think that there might be a way for you to massively return all characters to your hand. Like maybe at some point they make a 5-cost action that returns all characters that cost 3 or less to their owner's hands. And if you do that with Merlin, suddenly you're gaining 6 lore by just for questing 1 time.
Yeah, absolutely. The current combos I kind of see with this and would love if we could set up are Merlin in an Emerald deck, where you get Mother Knows Best and Genie on the job, and you can pick up your own shifted character, because then that's 2 characters returning to your hand.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, that's where my brain starts to go. Obviously, that granted, I guess Emerald Amethyst is actually one of the more aggressive color pairs too.
Yeah, it
That
is.
definitely could be, something there. It's a deck that wants to play Befuddle and stuff too.
I mean, at the very least, I think a 1/5/1, is not the best in the world, but there's just some spots where it can quest for 2 or 3. Maybe that's worth something. In the future, I think this is the one to just keep your eye out for. There's going to be things to pair with it at some point, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
All right, next up, we got Winnie the Pooh, the Honey Wizard. This is a 5-cost Amethyst Incubal. It's a 5/5 for 5. That's enormous. And it quests for 2. But no abilities. This is maybe the best vanilla character we've seen so far.
Yeah, so I actually am kind of interested in this card.
Same.
We talked about it briefly last week on the episode. I actually have been playing Cerberus in a lot of my steel decks.
Right.
And I've actually even been, dabbling with Krunk, 6-cost Inkable 6/6 that quests for 2. And I typically end up playing Cerberus, and it's not because of the lore count, it's because of the cost.
Right.
And I don't know how necessary that 6th point of willpower is, where that 2nd point of lore is huge.
No, for sure. I mean, obviously they're in different colors, but I just think it's great that Amethyst has something of this sizing for that turn because, I think the one that's going to be fighting with the most is the 5-cost Queen from Amethyst that taps to draw a card. And that, I think is maybe a better card than this in like a control deck. But if you're trying to be more aggressive, not only is this card a way for you to consistently challenge some of your opponent's weaker characters, but it quests for 2 and it's right on curve. So I'm definitely looking forward to trying this at least. It's not special because it doesn't have a cool ability. And almost every single character that's worth its nuts and bolts either costs 2 or 3 and is enormous for its size, or it has an awesome ability. So it's nice to see these kind of vanilla characters down the line that have just much bigger sizing, and we're just going to see if they can punch through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these cards have kind of flown under the radar with how good Cerberus has been when I've been playing it. And, I've been, like I said, dabbling with Krunk now too. Those cards have impressed by a lot. And kind of similar to Maui, where Maui is just those stats plus, keywords that lets him trade off really quickly. But the stats really do matter. And I think that's something we maybe have underexplored so far.
Yeah, I mean, we're all focused on how much do you quest for, right? And I'm a big fan of, the, what's it called? The dresser. Oh my God, the 3/4 and Amethyst. The 3-cost 3/4. I forgot. No. Is it Baroque? I thought it was, anyway. There's just 3-cost 3/4s all over the place in this game, and they don't see that much play. And I think that maybe they should see more play because they're great at handling things like opposing 3-drops. A 3/4 is just the biggest you're going to get for a 3-drop, and outside of having more strength. Yeah,
absolutely. I think those cards also should see a lot more play in Rapunzel decks in general.
Yeah,
I don't think enough people look at them when they are playing Rapunzel decks. One of the cards that I'm most afraid of when people play it is Mr. Smee, which is just such an innocuous card, but they're going to draw a million cards off their Smee. Yeah. It's terrifying.
Dude, Smee's great. It's a 2/5, right? It's huge.
Yep.
All right, next up, we're going to be moving on to I'm Stuck. This is 1-cost Inkable Amethyst action. Character on the card is Winnie the Pooh stuck in a hole trying to get out. Classic Winnie the Pooh scenario. The action says chosen exerted character can't ready at the start of their next turn. We have a term for this in Magic, and in Magic it's called one of two things. It's either stun or it's freeze. And what we're basically doing is that we're taking a character that's already been activated on the previous turn, and for one, we're going to make sure that it doesn't do anything next turn. That's not that good of a card in general, but at only 1 cost and inkable, you're going to have to compare this more so to something like Befuddle, which is also a relatively weak spell, but in the right spots, it's certainly awesome, especially considering that it's just going to be ink most of the time.
Yeah, I think I do agree that you mostly should be comparing it to a card like Befuddle. I think the thing that makes Befuddle pretty playable is that when Befuddle's good, it's good early, and then you just ink it in the mid to late game. Where this card, you're always going to ink it early because it's not good until late.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be harder to line up just because you're going to kind of have to draw it and be like, oh, perfect. And then you play it. Where there definitely might be some situations where, you know, you draw it in a weird, tense situation in a mid game, and you're like, let me skip my ink for a turn or two and hold this just in case. It's going to be a little bit harder to facilitate than a Befuddle, but I do think the effect is powerful, and you know, I'm going to throw one or two in a lot of my decks just to try it out once it's out.
All right, why don't you give us the next one?
All right, we have the Sorcerer's Spellbook. It costs 3, is not inkable, and it has knowledge. Exert and 1 ink to gain 1 lore.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
So I think it's going to be too slow.
Don't give me that.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I think it's going to be too slow. We have a card that I think is somewhat similar in Sapphire already, the Eye of the Fates.
Yeah, that card's cool.
Yeah, I think that card is actually really good and a bit underplayed. And that card is 4 cost, inkable, exert to give a character +1 lore for the turn.
Yep.
So it, in essence, does something very similar where it effectively it exerts to gain a lore. The Spellbook does it in a much more controlling archetype, so it's a little bit better facilitated for doing that. But at the cost of not being inkable, which I think is just going to hold this card way too far back against Magic Mirror, against Cauldron, and then there's Ursula and Elsa, not to mention whatever you're going to play from your other color.
Mm-hmm.
I think Uninkables, especially in Amethyst, have the least room to, you know, fit in.
All right, I'm going to posit an alternate universe where instead of playing Ursula's and Elsa's, you just don't. And the way you win is with 4 copies of this card and then just a ton of interaction. Maybe characters that all have like Reckless and Rush, you know, your Gastons, your Mauis, and then you just focus on, you know, character beatdown instead of trying to quest, and you just let Sorcerer's Spellbook do most of the heavy lifting. I think that this is going to be like a 4 of, you know, I don't think this is going to be like a 1 of, but even as a 1 of, it's still pretty cool because you can get to spots in the Ruby Amethyst Mirror that are just, you're not going to quest. You're not going to get to quest with your character. I played it a decent amount. You play something, it dies immediately one way or another. And they don't have an answer to Sorcerer's Spellbook. And if you have 2 of them going, you're going to end the game pretty quickly. And that, while drawing a card off of the Magic Mirror is a bit stronger in a lot of spots, as the game comes, you know, to a halt, as it normally does in those mirrors, something like Sorcerer's Spellbook is just ideal as opposed to a character that's just going to get interacted with and never gain you any lore.
It is perfect for the mirrors. I do think those characters serve more function, like especially in Ruby Amethyst. Your cards like Elsa and Ursula actually serve more as interaction and, you know, challenging, exerting their stuff, reducing their lore, and drawing a card. That's actually their primary function, and then they just happen to have 3 lore stapled onto them. And then they happen to be how you win the game once you've already won the game.
I mean, that's fair. I don't know. That I've played the Ruby Amethyst Mirror. It doesn't really go down like that too much. But against the other matchups, I definitely think that that's true. I've played a ton against Ruby Amethyst where I thought I was very close to winning, and then I get hit with a Be Prepared, and then Ursula drains my lore, and then they pocket watch a 7-drop Aladdin and eat and gain some more lore and take my lore away. And like, yeah, I think that that's true. But that the Ruby Amethyst Mirror is literally just characters that come down and kill your opponent's character every single turn. Spells that kill your opponent's character every single turn. And I just think Spellbook is just a way to break through. It might not work. It might be really bad against other matchups. If there ever is a such thing as a sideboard in this game, I think that this card could be incredible for those mirror matches. But I digress. I think the
Yeah,
cards.
100% agreed on the sideboard. I think it is probably one of the best cards you could play for the mirror. I just think that it's kind of bad
It's like
everywhere else,
stage 3.
unfortunately.
It's like a stage
Yeah.
3 mirror card or whatever. It's just the mirror's
Yeah, exactly.
annoying, and it's just like a super late game mirror card. One place where I want to compare this to, for those of you who play Magic the Gathering, this card reminds me a lot of Millstone.
That's what came to my mind when I saw the card too.
Yeah, Millstone's a 2-cost artifact in Magic that spends 2 and tap to mill your opponent for 2 cards. And in a 60-card deck, that means it essentially deals them 0.75 damage or whatever, just like not very much damage for 2 and activate. And the whole goal of the deck is to essentially win without having to play creatures. And I think Sorcerer's Spellbook is very similar in that regard. And while you can still play characters to help quest and to get you up to 20, I just think it's really sweet that they made a card that means that you don't have to play characters in your deck to win. That's all.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, I'll do the next one. This one is one everyone's talking about. This is Bell Hidden Archer. Bell Hidden Archer is a 5-cost non-inkable 3/3 out of Emerald, and it quests for 3. It has Shift 3, which means you can pay 3 and put it on top of another character named Bell, and there's a couple of different Bells. And it has the ability Thorny Arrows. When this character is challenged, the challenging character's player discards all cards in their hands. All right, I'll start. So earlier, we were talking about the new queen and how her ability basically says your opponent is not going to quest. If they do, they're going to get smushed. Bell is kind of the opposite. And Bell says, you're not going to challenge me or you're going to get squished. And so what really is she kind of has evasive, right? Like your opponents can't really challenge her without losing the game on the spot, which means that she basically can't be challenged until one of 2 things are met. You're going to die and you have to challenge it, or you empty your hand. The third option is discard your hand when you're pretty low on cards already. You've mostly emptied your stuff, or you target it with some sort of direct removal like Dragon's Fire or Smash. Smash is the big hit on this card.
Yeah, completely agree. I think this card is really cool.
Same.
And really good. It does kind of have... It's like... It's their favorite thing to put on Emerald cards, which is just 5-cost uninkable.
Yeah, it's... Look, we haven't talked about it too much yet, but there's certainly this thing in Magic that happens all the time. We talk about cards sitting on top of other cards, where when they're very similar in what they do and how they operate, but they have the exact same cost as another card, oftentimes you're just put in a spot where you have to choose between 2 things that are relatively similar, and one of those things is just clearly better than the other. And in this instance, I think Cusco is better than Bell Hidden Archer because it has Ward, and in the places where your opponents are most likely to be able to deal with Cusco, they're going to be attacking it. And I think that we've already shown that Emerald is great at preventing your opponent from attacking your stuff via Mother Knows Best. Your splash color often has Dragon's Fire or Let It Go as additional pieces of interaction. You have Genie on the Job. And so I think that having characters with Ward is significantly stronger than this. Your opponents already don't really want to challenge your stuff because so many of the Emerald characters have a punish for challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I personally will actually still play this card a lot.
Yeah, I want to try it for sure.
A lot of my Cusco Mad Hatter decks are Amber base, and I really want to be playing Just in Time, but I didn't have the density of strong 5-drops to put in. And, that's where it's almost a benefit that I have a bunch of cards sitting on top of each other. Is that true. I can just be really redundant and play a bunch of Just in Times because I'm always going to have a sweet 5-drop to put in.
No, that's definitely the upside of having a bunch of 5-cost uninkables is they all work with the uninkable Just in Time.
Yeah, it's just great deck building.
All right. Next up, this is the new Flynn Rider. Why don't you tell us about him?
Yeah, so it's funny. This is a card I'm actually very excited for.
Ooh.
I just saw it on the spoiler, but so it's 1-cost inkable, 1 strength, 3 willpower, quests for 1, no other abilities.
Look, how many characters in the game already exist? 1-cost inkable, 1/3. I believe there's 2 of them. Yeah, yep. It's Minnie Mouse from Ruby, and I want to say it's Olaf from Amethyst. Correct. And those 2 characters are not really seen as playable right now, but that doesn't mean that they won't be playable down the line. It also doesn't mean that they're actually unplayable. It just means that we haven't figured out the best ways to utilize them yet. But one of the cards that are that I really love in Emerald is the 2-drop Megara. Giving something +2 strength on a 2-drop doesn't actually come up that much as far as like being great, but it's inkable, which is nice. But when you play stuff like Flynn Rider as your 1-drop, and your opponent's on the play and they play Goon and you play Flynn Rider, if they go to quest on turn number 2, Flynn Rider's going to chew them out with Meg.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back on you just a little bit about those 2 cards, Minnie and Olaf, not being good. The reason they're not good is because they are in 2 of the most controlling colors and slowest colors in the game, where this Flynn Rider is in one of the most aggressive colors.
Okay. So and even though it's a 1/3, it sounds like it's an aggressive card and not a defensive card.
Yeah, so this is one of my more fun things that I absolutely love about Lorcana in general, is I know you're big on Goon theory, the theory that you posited, right? The 1/3 theory.
You can't just drop Goon theory and not give people a brief understanding.
Why don't you give us a brief rundown for the people, and then I'll give you the 1/3 theory.
The idea behind Goon theory is that your opponents are going to play stuff sometimes that are cheap, and they're going to be very threatening. 1 cost Lilo, 1 cost Maleficent. These are cards that quest for 2. If your opponent plays 1 on the play on turn 1, and you have no way to interact with it on the first 3 turns, you've essentially already lost the game. And so I posited a while back in an article called Goon Theory, where every deck should be playing at least 4 goons, and in some instances should be playing 6 or 8. They're inkable. I think they go in a lot of different decks for that reason alone, but also you just need to be able to interact with your opponent's stuff, and there's not a whole lot of 1-cost cards that do that except for goons.
Exactly. And so the next layer of that is I agree with you completely. Don't get me wrong. I think goons are more of a defensive card.
Yes.
Right? And that's what your whole theory is positing, is that, you know, your opponent may be hyper aggressive. You need to put goons in your deck so that you can defend yourself when you're on the draw. And so what Flynn Rider does, and the other 1-cost 1/3s, is they are an aggressive card, just like Lilo, because I play this on turn 1, and then you play your goon to defend yourself, right?
Right, and then I just can't, right? Without help, I can't challenge.
So when I quest, you get to challenge me, and I live, so I get to quest again. Where if I just played a goon of my own to be aggressive, we just trade.
Right.
So I only get 1 lore out of the exchange, where with a 1/3, you still get your result of trading, but I still get my 2 lore. And so I got the same amount of lore I would have out of my Lilo, but I traded with your goon versus just having my thing die and your goon living.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's one that I hadn't really thought about too much. As more characters get printed with higher willpower, we might see more cards like Megara actually see more play. I know that Ruby, is it Ruby or Emerald? One of the colors in the starter deck comes with an item that gives +1 attack to one of your characters just by exerting it. And if it's an Aladdin character, you get +2. I can't remember the name of the card, but
I believe the card is Scimitar, and it is Emerald.
Okay, so Scimitar is something that like you can use to make a goon trade up on a 3 willpower character, but when I'm having to play 2 different cards to pair up to fight off a 1-drop, you know, before it gains too much lore, that's pretty scary. But I really like where your head's at on this. I think that maybe we end up playing, Emerald Amethyst aggro, where we get 2 of those, and we get the 1-cost Maleficent to quest for 2. You could play it alongside Ruby and get the Minnie Mouse that also quests for 1. That's a 1/3, and then those could just be your primary early aggressive characters because they fend off goons, like you said. That's actually super cool.
Yeah, so I think actually most importantly, this makes it so I don't feel the need to be playing Ruby or Amethyst with my Emerald deck. I can just put this in my deck that already wanted to be Emerald Amber and have a 1/3 now.
And be aggressive.
Exactly.
Right.
And I don't have to play, Stitch on turn 1. Even though I probably won't even play Stitch Rockstar. I was only playing that because I already had some Stitches in my deck because I needed more 1-drops, but now I have this extra Flynn Rider.
Don't you be talking smack about no Stitch Rockstar. It's going in every Ember deck that I play. Don't you worry. Don't you worry about that. All right, let's move on. The next card we're going to be taking a look at is Bounce. This is a 2-cost Emerald Uninkable. And it says, return a chosen character of yours to your hand to return another chosen character to their player's hand. So this might be one of those cards that works well with the new Merlin, where you can bounce your own character and your opponent's character. In Magic, there's a card very similar to this in blue, and it's called Appeal from Reality. And it was one of my favorite cards ever printed because of some cool combat tricks you could do with it. But all in all, you're just going to be using Bounce to stall your opponent out a little bit, but you're also going to be using it with your own stuff to reset abilities that come into play or reset damage that's already on your characters.
Yeah, this makes me want to do the pick up my shifted thing even more.
Yeah.
If we had like a really, really good come into play ability on a shift thing, maybe you even shift onto the same thing twice and then pick up 3 things and go off with your Merlin. This is what gets my gears turning,
Yeah, I don't think that one's going to be like a super big game changer. I mean, it could be down the line if there's enough 1-drops that have cool abilities where you can afford to play something on 1 and then bounce it on 2. I know that when I started playing early on, I played against one of the owners of Apex Gaming. I played against Taryn Huck in some fun games last time we were visiting, and he was using Befuddled essentially to protect his 1-drop Lilos and Maleficents to kind of reset them. And this card can do something very similar to that while interacting with your opponent's stuff and keeping them off balance as well. And we know that Emerald is pretty solid already at interacting with characters by bouncing them.
Yeah, that's really good to know, or like to note that you can do that, like quest with your Lilo, pick it up with bounce their thing, so they can't challenge your other thing. That's really good.
Or you can just recast your Lilo, and they just have a hard time challenging it because it's readied.
Yeah, that's true too. Then also you could do this with like Maleficent, the 3-cost, and
yeah,
kind of go off where you get to draw a card extra.
If only Bounce was a song, it'd be sick.
That would be sweet. One thing I actually want to point out, just in general, from a competitive aspect, is Inkables versus non-Inkables has been this hotly debated topic of you're crazy if you have 18 Uninkables.
Yeah.
Which I think is generally true if you're playing like a control deck where you need to hit your ink every turn for the first like 10 turns. Which is funny because those are usually the decks that have the most non-Inkables. But
that's the balancing mechanic, man. They've really done a great job, I think, of putting some of the more powerful or unique cards have that drawback. One thing I love that 9-cost Maleficent is inkable. I never have a fear of putting 4 in my deck. And it's such an incredible late game card, but early game, it's just ink. And that's not true for a lot of the other finishers and a lot of the other colors.
Yep. But my main point was that in a very, very aggressive deck where you are not going to be like you have 4 Cuscos in your deck as your only high end, you don't need that much ink. You could get away with 20 Uninkables pretty easily, I think.
Maybe down the line. You're going to have to show me. You're going to have to show me that deck.
Don't quote me on that, but
you're going to have to show that to me.
I mean, just think about it from like Magic, where in your mono red aggressive deck that had Thundermaw Hellkite is your only 5-drop, you'd still play 20, 22 lands.
That's fair. But the fact that all these cards are split cards means that things are a little different. I get what you're saying. And I agree.
But
down the line, I think 20 is a lot. I don't think people understand how much 15 is. People keep getting like, screwed on ink or whatever. And they're like, I'm getting so unlucky. No, you're not. You're building your deck bad.
Maybe we could do a whole discussion or video about that in the future.
Yeah, maybe.
I think a lot of that actually goes back to your mulligan decision.
Sure.
Where just baseline, if your deck has a lot of non-inkables, you should never be mulliganing cards that are inkable in your opening hand.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because that's how you get set up for failure of like, I
drew 4 uninkables. That's so unlucky.
Yeah, I'm gonna mulligan basically my whole hand so that I can find a better hand, and then Oh, I drew 5 non-inkables in my 18 non-inkable deck. How do I can't even play the game.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the next card. We're going to be moving into Ruby now. The first up is going to be Raya, Warrior of Kumandra. She's a 4-cost Ruby Inkable character. She's 5/3, quest for 1. I believe that there's a card that is exactly this already. Correct me if I'm wrong, and that's the Scar. The 4-cost Scar from Ruby is already the exact same.
Yes, the only notable changes are the type line of Storyborn Hero Princess versus Villain, and I don't know what else Scar is.
I think actually. Floodborn. I think Scar's Floodborn. Or at least maybe the A-drop's Floodborn. I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably Storyborn and then Villain.
Sure.
Yeah, there's not much to say. You know, it's effectively a functional reprint. This card might work well with Moana and maybe move on at some point.
Don't give me the functional reprint thing. That's not true. Every character that has a name that's like a main character from a movie, there's going to be there's going to be shifts for that at some point, and so they're just going to be strong or weak based on the shifts above them. And we haven't seen the bigger iteration of Raya, excuse me, from Raya and the Last Dragon. And once we do, though, we'll have much better context on whether or not this card is good. But for now, it's
true. That's not something I had even considered. That's definitely a big thing to keep an eye on.
That was one big part of Goon Theory that I made sure that everyone understood, is that Stitch is the best Goon. Because Stitch...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Stitch is the only Goon that has a shift. And for now. And maybe that changes, but...
Yeah, I doubt Goons will get a shift, but that would be sweet.
Yeah. All right, your turn on this one. Let's do the dinner bell.
All right, we got the dinner bell. Yeah, 4-cost, uninkable. You know what happens? Do you? I don't know. We're gonna find out though. It's 2 and exert for draw cards equal to the damage on chosen character of yours, then banish them.
I'm pretty sure this means they're eating them, right? They're just eating. That's what you know. What happens? They're just eating the character. Man. That's dark.
I guess so. Yeah, that's pretty dark for a Disney game.
Yeah, I agree. I don't even know what this is from, but it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, to be fair, most of the characters are made of meat. You know, they're all made of animals and stuff, right?
Yeah, they are. All right, Hannibal.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do think this card could be pretty sweet with, like, specifically Maui. That's something I've dabbled with a little bit recently.
Yeah.
On my quest for Surfer Stitch decks was I played some Ruby Amber, and Rapunzel plus Maui is a heck of a combo.
Yeah, I was actually thinking this would be perfect in the same decks that want Rapunzel, because they're very similar, and not only in what you're trying to target, but also in what they do, just drawing cards.
Yeah, I do. While I do agree, I think you might run into enough of a tension of it might be hard enough to set up Rapunzel in the first part, and Rapunzel's already so powerful that they're going to be trying to play around that. Where in most of your Ruby decks, if you aren't Amber, they aren't even going to have that on their radar.
Yeah, I think we can move on from this one. It's got some gross background. I don't think it's very good, but it's fine. All right, next up, we're going to do one of 2 new Cogsworths. This is a 5-cost Inkable. This is Cogworth Grandfather Clock. Cogworth is a 2/5, quest for 2, and it has shift 3. You may pay 3 and then shift onto another character named Cogsworth. Cogsworth has ward, which means you can't be targeted except a challenge. And then the ability Unwind. Your other characters gain Resist 1. Resist is a new ability that says anything that would deal a damage to a character with Resist deals less damage based on the Resist cost. So in this one, Resist 1 means everything that deals damage to Cogsworth will be -1.
Yeah, I think really quick, just because it's next on the list anyway, it's important when we review this card to just do the new Cogsworth that goes with it, which is a 2-cost. Yeah, 2-cost Inkable, 2 strength, 3 willpower, quests for 1, and it has wait a minute. Your characters with Reckless gain exert to gain 1 lore.
I mean, that's pretty cool, man. I've been looking for some more reasons to play Gaston, the 2-drop from Ruby. And that and Maui together in a Sapphire deck with Cogsworth, this is a card that's pretty reasonable on stats, 2/3 for 2, Inkable, which is nice. And the ability is just upside, and it lets you play the card we were just talking about, the bigger version of Cogsworth, the Grandfather Clock. So
yeah, absolutely. I think these two cards are just going to be a package in most Sapphire decks moving forward. I think you'll kind of see them supplant Aurora 2 and Aurora 5 in most Sapphire decks. The Aurora package kind of always had some tension of, you had a 2-cost 2/2 that quested for 2, which is a good card, but then
you're aggressive and and it doesn't challenge well and it gets traded with goons.
Exactly. And then when you shift it and upgrade it, you don't gain that extra lore, you just gain the stats.
Right.
Which is it feels weird to do it that way.
Yeah, part of the shift is always, are you gaining some extra lore? Because if you're having to essentially eat the character that's underneath, you have to have a payoff. And the unwind payoff, your other characters having resist 1 is phenomenal because it works on offense and defense. And so if you can challenge that turn, everything that you challenge is going to deal 1 less damage to all your stuff.
Yep. And then also just an inverse of the 5-cost Aurora is Cogsworth has ward instead of giving everything else ward.
Yep.
So that your shift thing is actually more protected.
And it is the most important thing because it has the ability that's being granted to everything else. So
exactly.
I'm completely on board. I think this Cogsworth package is going to be maybe something that helps bring Sapphire back into the fold. Sapphire, I think, is currently maybe the worst color so far in the game. In initial testing, everyone was super high on Bell Strange was special because, it was all about ramping and people like ramping. And they realized that the more time they spend ramping, the more time your opponent has to just bury you on the table. And something like Cogsworth combo, the Grandfather Clock, just feels like it's going to smush some people in some really tight spots. I'll be really interested to see how Sapphire uses these two.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, next up, we're going to be talking about Gaston, Intellectual Powerhouse. Hit me.
Alrighty, 6-cost, Uninkable, common trend for a lot of these cards, it seems. He is a 4/4, quests for 3, has shift 4 onto your other Gastones. And then Developed Brain. Whenever you play this character, look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may put 1 into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in any order.
So this is already, I think, fusing Sapphire and Ruby, not only with Gaston, but also with the Grandfather Clocks we were just looking at. Being able to give the 2-drop Gaston the ability to quest makes it not have to be reckless and run headfirst into something. And this 6-drop Gaston allows you to shift onto it too. And so you're basically getting 2 Sapphire cards that pair really well with a 2-cost Ruby card. And I would love to see that deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And also one of the things historically that Ruby Sapphire has struggled with is the lack of card advantage provided because neither color really has a strong card advantage package or engine.
I mean, the one that
just fall behind in a lot of
the
games.
one that Sapphire has is the 6-drop Robin Hood, which in my experience does not trigger very often.
Yeah, it only really triggers against the decks that are really good at drawing a lot of cards. Yeah. And then just getting 1 off your 4/4 usually isn't enough to make a big enough impact. Where this Gaston, you can shift it so it can come down really early.
Quest for 3.
A ton. Woo! Yeah. And it also replaces your Reckless Gaston that, you played on 2, and then your opponent kind of maybe just, especially if they're a more card advantage based deck, they may have just skipped playing a threat like I did against you in our versus video, and then you kind of get to embarrass them for skipping on the board. You just play down this huge threat that also already replaced itself, and better than drawing a card, it found the best card for you in your top 3.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're pairing it with Ruby, I mean, maybe that's Be Prepared. Maybe that's Dragon's Fire. You're just going to be facing off maybe against some interaction on the following turn. And so if you're not ready to beat Gaston when it comes down, chances are you're not going to be able to beat it when they get to untap with it either.
You're definitely not going to be able to beat it when they get a second one off the first one.
Yeah, that's true. All right, very excited about the Sapphire cards so far in the set. Looking forward to more for sure. We're going to be moving into the last color now. This is Steel. There's a few awesome Steel cards that I definitely want to talk about. The first one is going to be Cinderella Stout-Hearted. This is a 7-cost Steel Inkable, 5/5, and a quest for 3. A shift for 5 on top of another Cinderella. And itself has resist 2, which means that anything that deals damage to it is -2. And the ability, the Singing Sword. Whenever you play a song, this character may challenge ready characters this turn. So you get to untap with Cinderella Stouthearted, or you shift. The turn where you shift, you can use it to sing something, and then your other characters can challenge ready characters. Or you shift, play a song with another character like Ariel, Spectacular Singer, and then you use Cinderella to go straight at your opponent's readied characters. And resist 2 means that your Cinderella is very unlikely to die.
Yeah, so far I think this is the best card spoiled. This card is incredible.
I mean, it's a 7-drop. Like, you got to be enormous if you don't draw a card.
Yeah, but this card is enormous.
Yeah, it is.
And some. You know, like, this card, even if you kind of discount resist, it's basically like a 5/7, but it's way better than that. Because whenever you challenge something that has 3 strength, it's only taking 1 damage.
Yeah, and it's going to be really hard for your opponents to gang up on it. And when I play against aggressive strategies, something like Cinderella Stouthearted is going to be nightmarish because you just have to ignore it. I will say this. I don't think this is scarier to play against than 6-drop Tinkerbell if I'm playing an aggressive deck. But it's just another thing that compounds Steel's advantage against those aggressive strategies. And while Cinderella does cost 7, I think that it's going to be shifted quite a bit, and it's going to do some major damage when it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think this card is more impactful for the mid-rangey kind of games than against like hyper-aggressive decks, where to trade with this card one-on-one in combat, it takes 7 strength. That's so much.
Is that what has 7 strength? 7-drop Maleficent? Or 9-drop Maleficent's like the only thing?
Yep. And so there's a couple other cards you can kind of reach for that don't see a ton of competitive play currently, but this card is a juggernaut in combat.
Yeah,
seems you're going to be looking to have to kill it outside of combat. Even if you Elsa it, it's just going to ready because there's no way you're going to kill it in combat while it's exerted.
Yeah.
A card I would really like to pair this with maybe is actually the Aurora we were talking about that we thought might be getting supplanted, but giving this ward is huge.
I agree with that. And that was really something I was looking to make the Aurora good, was to give something relevant ward, because it itself doesn't have ward. And so your opponent's removal spells almost always go at the Aurora. And I don't think that the Sapphire decks are aggressive enough to make that worthwhile, but I also don't think that they have anything at the top end worth protecting. And so you always have to dip into other colors to find those things. And this Cinderella Stouthearted, like you said, it doesn't gain a card when it comes into play, but it is a huge presence on the table. And so if you are able to protect it with ward, I think that's money.
Absolutely.
All right. Very cool card. Excited to try it out in Steel mid-range. Next up is maybe my favorite card that's been previewed thus far, is the Prince Who Never Gives Up. This is a 3-cost Inkable Steel 1/3. It quests for 2, which is huge, and it has Bodyguard. So when it you may enter it exerted, an opposing character who challenges one of your characters must choose one with Bodyguard if able. And then it has Resist 1. And so that means that your opponent's Rafikis are not going to kill this thing.
Yeah, it is really good against Rafiki. It is kind of embarrassing against Gaston.
That's true, but I mean, look, Gaston is one of those cards that's going to trade 1-for-1 against most stuff. And if you have the Prince as your play for the turn, just don't play it exerted. You know, they have to challenge your goon or whatever. And I think that trading a Gaston for a goon is fine. It's hard for your opponent to navigate the game in such a way where Gaston kills what they want it to kill if the opponent knows what they're doing and plays their cards accordingly. And so you'll see Gaston be something people usually cast not on turn 2, but usually on like turn 4 or 5 to set up for like a 2-sequence trade so that they can pick and choose how their reckless character attacks.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually been using Pocket Watch a lot to, basically turn my Gastons into mini Mauis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. But yeah, I do think this Prince is really good. I think it's going to be really good to have a Bodyguard that has a relevant threat that it presents on the table.
Yeah, questing for 2 is a big deal.
Yeah, that's the one thing Simba doesn't do really well, right?
And the 3-cost Hercules. The 3-cost Hercules is like unsung hero of a lot of my decks because it trading straight up with Rafiki means that it's essentially protecting the smaller things. And this, does something pretty similar, but like you said, quest for 2, big deal.
Right, and also, I mean, this doesn't trade with Rafiki, but it makes the Rafiki attack it twice. And sure, the Rafiki lives, but you made it attack you once, and you got 2 lore, and all your other things were protected for 2 turns.
Right.
Which, honestly, might be better than trading with the Rafiki.
No, I agree. All right, last up is the last card we're going to be talking about today from Rise of the Floodborn. This is... why don't you tell me? Tell me what it is.
This is Tiana, Celebrating Princess. She costs 4, cannot be inked, has 1 strength, 4 willpower, quests for 2, has resist 2, and then she has what you give is what you get. While this character is exerted, and if you have no cards in your hand, opponents can't play actions.
That's pretty good in an aggressive deck, I gotta say.
Yeah, if you can empty your hand and then be confident that you are ahead with no hand, it's a strong card for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about cards from Magic the Gathering, but like there's a long list of cards that we call hay bears, which are usually cheap characters that we utilize to suppress our opponent's ability to play interaction. And the interaction that we're usually fighting off are big sweeper effects, things that clear the board completely of our creatures. And in Lorcana, it's basically just grab your sword and be prepared. But there's a lot of other actions that this thing will shut down and make it extremely difficult for your opponent to do much of anything, specifically because your characters have resist on them now, which means that they're hard to challenge as well.
Yeah, so I do think this card has a weird tension with Maui, specifically against Be Prepared decks, where you don't necessarily want to be questing with this because then a Maui just punks it out, and then you're going to get Be Prepared the following turn.
Maybe pair it with some bodyguards.
Yeah, maybe that's it, because then they can't, use an action to break up your bodyguard synergy. Or you can just leave this ready, and it has pretty close to ward while you have no hand.
Right.
Because they can't play any actions. They have to play like a character and item that targets it.
Well, it does. It says while this character is exerted and you have no cards in your hand.
Oh, it's only while it's exerted.
Yeah.
I was thinking just while it's in play.
Yeah, you're going to have to essentially put this vulnerable for a turn. But I think that if you pair this with Amber, you get 2-cost Simba bodyguard, Hercules, and the prince we just looked at as bodyguard. So you can have ways to keep it from being challenged, which is nice. And then you also, by essentially shutting down all your opponent's actions, you're essentially giving all of your characters ward as well.
Yeah.
Very cool
it's
card.
It's a sweet card for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, steel is one of the best colors for helping to empty your hand. And I see these types of cards just intermingling into my like Stitch Blitz deck I've been working on. So I'm just in love with Tiana Celebrating Princess. I think that card's awesome. So. All right, well, that is it for the previews for Rise of the Floodborn that we have so far. This is only, I believe it was 19 cards that we have previewed thus far. As we get more cards, we'll be talking about them on the podcast each week. But we're done for now. We will be moving on to our next segment, Harlan, and that's my favorite segment every week, and that's Card of the Week. What's your card of the week, Harlan?
Well, it may not surprise anybody because I've mentioned it about 1,000 times in this episode, but it is Surfer Stitch.
Oh, Stitch, big Carefree Surfer.
7-cost, 4/8.
Yeah, Stitch Surfer, a pretty powerful one. Definitely a favorite in some of the Amber mid-range strategies. Works really well with Rapunzel because you're just keeping all of your characters alive by giving them some refreshes on their health. Works really well in conjunction with all the princess stuff because they just have high willpower, so they stay around.
Just give me them cards. Just give me more cards. That's all I want.
Yeah. So what is a deck that you've been working on for Stitch Rockstar, just to give people a better idea? Yeah.
So I can maybe we can give you a link to one in the show description, and maybe we can get it up on the screen too. But I've been playing an Amber Steel Stitch Surfer Stitch deck that has been my favorite so far of my Surfer Stitch decks.
Mm-hmm.
You're just kind of playing a little bit of just a full curve. You know, you got your Captain Hooks and your Prince Erics, your Rapunzels. You're just trying to play to the board, exchange damage on characters, Rapunzel back up, keep some characters in play your Stitches. Lots of cards in your hand. You have Forgotten Me to combat the more mid-rangey decks.
That card's a beating sometimes, I gotta say. That thing hurts.
Yeah, that's one.
I wish it was a song, though, man. I wish it was something I could get with Ariel and sing.
It's not a song. As somebody who's usually not playing Amber.
Yeah.
But that's a card I've gotten really good at. You know, I'm gonna start holding something or inking extra. You know, in the last week or so, that card's been a beating and a half in a couple of games. So,
all right. Well, my card of the week is also an Amber card, but it's not Stitch Carefree Surfer. It's not even a Stitch at all. I know that's weird for me. My card of the week is Hades, Lord of the Underworld. This 4-cost 3/2. It's not inkable, and therein lies the tension. But if it is one of the very few non-inkables that you have in your deck, Hades, Lord of the Underworld is a great character to help refresh your early resources when your opponent challenges your stuff or is able to blast your characters off the table. A second Hades, getting the first Hades, means that your opponent can essentially never stop the chain, and until you decide to stop the chain yourself. And so, you know, I've had a lot of experiences with Hades thus far that were very, very positive. I've had a couple that were negative because it's not inkable, though.
Yeah, so I've been playing a lot with Hades in these Stitch decks, and I can't say enough good things about the card.
Nice.
I definitely had reservations about it being non-inkable. But one of the beauties of Amber, especially if you're playing Amber Steel, is it's really easy to have a low non-inkable count.
Right.
There's a ton of great cards that are inkable. And also an added bonus of Hades that I don't think most people consider, especially your first one, is you just play it on 4 and pick up your Stitch or whatever that died earlier and traded, and then you just have your ink for the next turn. And it's basically, you know, it's a 4-cost 3/2 draw card, which is crazy good.
No, for sure. It's one of the things I like most about the 4-drop Mickey Mouse that works with brooms, because sometimes your brooms run in, they trade for something, and they come back to your hand, and hey, you got an ink to play for the turn.
Ink, yeah.
Yeah. So definitely feel you on that. But that's our card of the week. Well, folks, that's going to do it for this episode of the Lost Boys podcast. Make sure to check out our sponsor, Games and Comics Paradise. They're a game store out of Fairfax, Virginia. They are your one-stop shop for all things in the trading card game space, from singles to sleeves, anything you need for Magic the Gathering, Lorcana, Yu-Gi-Oh! Make sure to check out Games and Comics Paradise, and you can check out their website at gcparadise.com. Thank you so much for Harlan for talking with me today about these new cards from Rise of the Floodborn. I think they're sweet. I'm very excited to play with them.
Yeah, I'm super hyped for the second set coming out. I love having more cards. You know, it just makes building decks and playing games so much more fun. Now,
I'll say this. We're going to be able to use these cards. We're actually already able to use them on Pixelborn right now. It's kind of a bastardized format because it's just like not real, because it's only 19 new cards or whatever. But one thing that we can start doing next week is we can start playtesting decks with these new cards on Pixelborn and showing the people at home how well they play and what kinds of decks they'll be fitting into. And I think that'll be something really fun for us to do.
Ooh, I'm down for that.
All right, cool. All right, well, thank you so much for Games and Comics Paradise for being our sponsor. Thanks to Harlan for being the co-host and being awesome. We love you. And that's going to do it. But shout out to Apex Gaming for helping us put on the Lorcana Invitational. That's going to be on the October 20th weekend. We're going to have invitational qualifiers at their home store in Caldwell, Ohio on September the 30th and October the 14th. And we're going to be broadcasting those live for y'all to watch as well. And it should be a lot of fun. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Lost Boys podcast. For Holland Fear, I'm Tandy. Bangarang!